August the 7th, 1972, the Ugandan dictator Idi Amin ordered the mass expulsion of all South Asians, 60,000 of us, from Uganda within just 90 days. Just 90 days to leave everything behind. Our friends, our homes, our businesses, savings and possessions. Our lives were torn apart. I came from Tanzania to Uganda when I married my husband, and his family came when it was a colony. Because of the British Nationality Act of 1948, we were given the right to live and work in the UK. We came 3 days before the deadline.
General Idi Amin gave his famous speech to his troops in Tororo barracks. And he says, "We are sabotaging the country's economy and milking the system." Pan, let me explain to you about the system. He had been trained by the British soldiers, and in his coup of 71, he was fully supported by the British. They wanted to use him in the Cold War, but you can't control a monster. Plus, most of the Indians coming to Tanzania in 1900s from Porbandar in Gujarat, in Punjab and in Mumbai had been encouraged to do so. We were subjects of the empire at the time. They sold East Africa as the America of the Hindus. So they built the British East African Railroad from Mombasa to Kampala. I don't suppose it was an easy job to do. In that blistering heat, my father-in-law was there, and he told us workers died in the region of 4 per mile, and some were eaten by the lions. Anyway, railroads finished, and they went into business with the Europeans right at the top, not doing any manual labor. Asians in the middle and Africans right at the bottom, doing unskilled jobs. It wasn't apartheid like South Africa, but the British lived in European town. We Asians had our own place, areas, and the Africans had theirs. So the infrastructure kept the Asian, mainly the Indians, and the Africans separate. And they kept the Africans poorer. And when the Africans complained, the British pointed to us. And so did Amin, to distract from what he was doing to the economy. I had African friends. Yes, they were like family. They cried with us when we left. But there were others who were exploiting the Africans. Yes, most certainly. It was not a good time. Very bad situation. There was divide and anger. So you can see how what happened. I feel they were sitting like they were sitting on the fire. Amin had warned, had we not left Uganda by his deadline, our homes and businesses were totally confiscated by them. At first, nobody took the threat seriously, but when the arrest began, people started to panic. What are we going to do? Where are we going to go? Where are we going to live? My husband, he had dreams. He loved Uganda. We all did.
In November 1972, I arrived with my husband, my daughter, niece and nephew at Heathfield Resettlement Centre in Honiton in Devon, with nothing more than a suitcase filled with photos and some clothes. We stayed in the camp for a month, and the volunteers in that camp were truly amazing. What they did for us was something I'll never forget. The authorities wanted us to steer clear of the Midlands and London, as there were already a lot of South Asians there. So we were relocated to Cornwall, where we were given a council house, and my husband was offered a job 2 weeks earlier. He first boarded with an English couple, Tom and Eileen. Despite the National Front protests happening at the time, 2,000 English families opened up their homes to Ugandan refugees via the Uganda Resettlement Board. Eileen and Tom were this kind of family. They looked after him for free. Eileen made him breakfast every morning and packed sandwiches for his lunch. When I arrived, she gave me and the children the same open-hearted welcome. She was 24, like me. Other than my cousins, who were relocated a short distance away, we didn't know a single soul. We were all alone, and I hardly spoke English. We found a council house, and the rent was only £2. The first week of moving to Cornwall, people left tin cans of food outside our doorstep. They knew what we'd been through, and like Eileen, they cared. We'd always earned our own money, but as refugees, these tinned cans of food were God-given gifts.
Britain agreed to help. We were only allowed to take £50 with us. Most people couldn't sell their homes and belongings. So we gave our homes to our friends. That sort of thing. What could you do? And in the middle of this madness, Leicester City Council took out a full one-page newspaper advert in the Ugandan Argus. It said, "Don't come to our city," because they wouldn't be able to house us or give our children any school places. Because there were far too many Asians already in there. They were taking marches out in the streets and called it Asian invasion. The language is the same, even though those migrating are not. On our way to Entebbe airport, we were stopped 7 times and held at gunpoint. They were looting us of anything valuable we had. I had my wrist bangles taken off my wrist. And there were women who had hid their earrings in their mouths. And the others were robbed of whatever little Ugandan money they had.
We had physically left Africa, but it was still within us. I missed everything. The sunshine, speaking Swahili, the closeness of a tight-knit community. When I cried for my mother and my sister, Eileen was there to give me a hug and remind me that another letter would be making its way to me across the sea soon. And in the winter, when I longed for the Sippy Falls and the 7 hills of Kampala, Eileen listened. She helped me book doctor's appointments and introduced me to the local laundrette when she saw I was still washing clothes by hand. I'd never seen one before. We stayed in Cornwall for 3 years before moving to Birmingham. We borrowed money from someone we knew and bought our first home in Spark Hill. Me and Eileen kept in touch. Years later, she came to visit me in Birmingham. Gave me the saddest news. She had cancer. Told me not to worry. Said she wasn't scared. I knew she was being brave. Her son called to let us know when she had died. Said she'd written in her last wishes for us to be notified.
We were in the Heathfield camp in Devon. I was glad because my children were safe. They set up 16 such camps in the military bases all around the country for whoever was coming. I had never seen snow before, so didn't have any warm clothes. So every day in the morning, I would walk from my hut to the hall in my flip-flops and my thin sari in that freezing cold. I still remember the first meal we were given: mashed potato and sausages. We appreciated the food. But you work so hard all your life not to be poor. And suddenly, I would cry, queuing up for the food with the plate in my hand. And those older dosababas and dosabas, their faces look so sad. We were not used to feeling helpless, like beggars. Anyway, sometimes the ladies would gather and sing bhajans to lift up our spirits. The English volunteers, they cheered us up. There were weekly charity groups coming with the rails of donated clothes. I took coats and some warm clothes from them. Some of your government workers were very rude. There was this man from another family and he complained. Well, why don't you then go back to where you came from? He was told. We were supposed to accept that? Go back to where you came from? Have I heard that again since? I can't tell you how many times. Too many. Too many. But we mustn't forget. We must remind ourselves that we were lucky. We survived. Amin did worse after we left. 500,000 Africans killed. Farmers, students, shopkeepers, doctors, families, entire families cleaned. I know people use the Ugandan migration story as an example of good migration and good immigrants. But not all the people who came from Uganda to UK became wealthy. This is only a part of our story.
I was born in Tikka in 1955 during the fight for independence. For half my time in Kenya, it was a colony, and the other half, it was a free country. My grandfather worked for the Ugandan Railway for the East African Protectorate, as it was called. We played gilli danda a lot. My father, Bapuji, was a carpenter and made the sticks for us. I want to bat, I'd say, but as the youngest of six, of course, my brothers always made me field. Then at midday, Ba would come over in a beautiful sari and call us for lunch. Sometimes it was a traditional Gujarati dal served with a pile of steaming rotis. Other days it was an African native dish like ugali or mogo, spiced up with chili and ginger. After school, we'd sneak into the priest's garden, which adjoined the mandir, and throw stones at the huge mango tree. We'd pocket the mangoes as soon as they landed on the ground and run away. Stop, or I'm going to tell your mothers. Kamangi, the priest's gardener, would shout to us. Santi sana, we'd cheekily reply in Swahili. Other days, we'd head to the street vendor selling roasted cassava chips and rows of crackling corn under hot coals in his makeshift barbecue. Jambo, Mtoto, Rafiki. Hello, my little friend. He always had a smile for us. We'd reply, Jambo, sana kamao. He'd pick up 2 slices, make slits in the middle, and sprinkle chili powder and salt. Limau? Lemon, he'd ask. Kidogo, we'd nod. After dinner, the family would walk through the town square to get to the mandir before dusk. I always loved ringing the bells.
At 6 a.m., I'd put on a salwar kameez and a jumper and go to the kitchen. I'd boil a saucepan of tea for my husband before he went to work. Utto ji, utto, wake up, I'd say. He worked for National and Grindlays in Nairobi, so it wasn't difficult for him to find work in the UK as such. It was a rented flat in Shepherd's Bush with my brother-in-law's family. We had 1 bathroom between 14. We'd pay 50p to use the public baths because there was never enough hot water for everyone. We'd walk home from our second jobs in North Holt to South Harrow just to save on bus fare. I don't want to use the words they'd shout. We'd see it written on the walls. Go home, you know? Enoch Powell made his Rivers of Blood speech a few years earlier about Kenya Asians coming to the UK. There was still that influence. Sometimes I'd get upset. Please, forget about life in Africa, my husband would say. We are here. We must do our best. We learned to eat chips with pickled onions, and we carried on.
The violence was already happening. Indians had become farmers too, but they didn't have the best land. The thousands of British settlers who came to Kenya were given fertile highlands under colonialism. They displaced entire African tribes, forcing them to live on barbed wire reservations. Kenyans and Indians had similar experiences. The British used the divide and rule approach in both countries. In India, they played on religious differences between Hindus and Muslims. In Kenya, between the different tribal groups and Asians and Africans. Yes, so the Kikuyu are Kenyan's largest tribe and were hit the hardest. The British made it illegal for them to grow their own food. In the early 1950s, a group called Mau Mau began to fight against these oppressions, killing 63 white officials. Some settlers and Africans they believed supported the British. To protect the white settlers' privilege, Britain launched Operation Anvil and killed 20,000 Kenyan civilians. The army put 1.5 million people in detention centers without trial. Men were castrated, beaten and clubbed to death. Women were sexually abused, tortured, and children were separated. All this was done 10 years after Britain, with allies, had defeated the Nazis. Despite Jomo Kenyatta's denouncement of the Mau Mau, he was jailed for 9 years. I vaguely remember adults discussing his imprisonment, but at 6 he was of no concern to me. I was 7 when Kenya won independence on the 12th December 1963. Kenyatta was elected president the following year. My secondary school began admitting African children from 1967. I had Kikuyu friends, including Wanjiru, who was named after one of the 9 Kikuyu clan founders. Wanjiru and I shared a very special bond, but friendships like ours were being weakened by what was going on around us.
Roads were named after our villages and towns in India. You had Jamnagar Avenue, Hoshiarpur Road, Surat Square. It was a good life. Actually, my best days were at Kisumu Girls High School. I was captain of the netball and hockey teams. On the weekends, I'd go for mogo and sweet corn street snacks with my friends alongside Main Harbour Road, or to Nyanza Picture Palace in Kisumu, or Shan Cinema in Nairobi, just to watch a film.
As children, we didn't understand the impact liberation would have on us and our families. In the middle of my studies, Kenyatta started an Africanization drive, giving first preference to African Kenyans for jobs. Our families were actively being prevented from earning a living. Slowly, the city started demanding that the government also banned non-Kenyans from owning shops and businesses. So, this is why people fled to Britain. Our exodus wasn't the same as it was for Ugandans. We settled here ourselves with the help of relatives and friends from Kenya who'd moved earlier. I didn't realize then why some of my family, my extended aunts, had come separately to England from 1967. I just remember asking Bapuji, why is my brother, going to England? And why doesn't the family go at the same time? Bapuji explained how it wasn't just the ticket prices, but the Labour government in England had rushed in these emergency laws. The Commonwealth Immigrants Act, to end the freedom of Asians and East Africans moving to the UK. They were issuing only 1,500 vouchers a year, and you needed one of these on top of your British passports to come to the country. These quotas and laws didn't apply to the white settlers in Kenya. So there were those obstacles of families being split up too.
We'd sit together at 9 o'clock to listen to the government news. Time is running out for us, my husband kept saying. There will be no work left. How will we survive? Better to go to Britain. As citizens of the UK and the colonies, we could choose whether to opt in for a British passport or Kenyan citizenship. We were given a 2-year deadline to decide, but most of the community was hesitant. Those with jobs in public sectors were replaced by Africans, and Jomo Kenyatta had revoked all licenses with non-Kenyan traders. Nobody knew what was going to come next. My husband was also removed from his post. It took 2 years for the visas to arrive. Without working, we had drained all of our savings. The air had become tense. We packed whatever we could, but the house, we left to the housekeeper. A school friend of mine. Her parents were murdered in the 2 years we waited for the UK visas to arrive. It is so important for new generations to know the histories of their grandparents. My friend, becoming an orphan at 15, that is also the legacy of the British Empire.
I passed my O levels in Kenya in 1971, just before moving to Britain. I knew some of my Indian classmates from Kenya when I attended college in Birmingham for my A levels. I can never remember my parents expressing any resentment towards the British or Kenyans. I don't feel this way either. In 2017, Kenya's current president, Uhuru Kenyatta, declared Asians as the nation's 44th tribe. Britain's Race Relations Act 1976 was a partial response to the Asian Kenyans' migration to Britain, and recently the UK paid out 20 million in compensation to Kenyans who suffered abuse during the Mama uprisings. So, it's slow, but I think the world is progressing as it must from these darker times.